Welcome to the Buckeye Battlecry show. I am your host, Brandon Held. I'm a longtime diehard sports fan, especially the Ohio State Buckeyes football. This week's topics, we're going to discuss the Week 10 highlights, the Buckeyes versus Penn State, my top 5 games of last week review, my top 10 versus the AP top 25, this week's legend in Scarlet and Gray, my preview of Week 11's top 5 games and picks, and my Instagram topic of the week. So let's start off with Week 10 highlights. And of course, we have to start with the Ohio State Buckeyes taking on Penn State Nittany Lions. The Buckeyes win this 38-14. The win is no surprise there. The surprise is where this game ended up being. Originally was supposed to be one of the best games of the season. Ohio State was supposed to have a blackout, which they didn't do because of the status of Penn State. And I have a lot to say about this game. I watched the game as an analyst when plays are being called on both the offense and defensive side of the ball. And when you watch from this perspective, you can see how aggressive the play calling is on both sides of the ball. You can see how fired up or aggressive the players are in their emotions and how hard they're trying to play this game. And I just want to touch on that. So I will start on offense. So for starters, the offensive line has just completely been missing on some blocks at times. And it doesn't matter what play you call. If just one of the old linemen misses a block, it doesn't matter. The play is dead. Either Sayin or the running back has to be able to make the player miss to make a play. And most of the time, that just doesn't happen because they don't have a chance because the defender is in there so quickly. So that needs to get cleaned up. I really thought the O-line was going to be a strength of the team this year. And I'm not saying that they are bad. Those whiffs, those misses, they're equivalent or worse to a wide receiver dropping the ball, right? And that's a statistic that is tracked because they potentially kill a drive or worse, change the outcome of a game if it's a close game. The next issue I have is when the Buckeyes are leading 17-7 with less than 2 minutes left in the half, and you have a chance to just hurt Penn State by going down the field and taking a 20-7 or even better 24-7 halftime lead, and instead you come out and you call a run to CJ Donaldson, which is considered a conservative, safe play call, which says to me, you're okay with going into halftime up 17-7, which first of all drives me crazy with this conservative play calling when Penn State has shown they cannot stop the passing game. And they do fairly well against the run. So then Donaldson, who shouldn't even get the ball in this situation, coughs it up and lets it get ripped out of his arms. Then Penn State has the ball, runs it in, and we now have a 17-14 halftime score. This was terrible situational coaching. I have to assume this was Ryan Day's call to run the ball here. He loves to play it safe when the Buckeyes have a lead. But playing it safe with plays that haven't been working is not the right call. You might say, yeah, Brandon, but we won 38-14. Yeah, the Buckeyes did, and we're most likely going to win this game in the second half. But the issue is this. This is the type of play calling that takes losses in close football games. Imagine the Buckeyes are playing scum or a playoff team, and they're in that situation, and it's 10-7. And Ryan Day wants to play it safe, and the other team makes that same play and turns the ball over and punches it in, and now the Buckeyes are losing 14-10 at halftime in an important game. It's just bad situational coaching. Let me make this as clear as possible. Julian Sayin is the best quarterback in the country. Period. He may end up being the best quarterback Ohio State has ever had. There isn't a throw he cannot make, whether he's in the pocket or on the run. His accuracy is unmatched in college football right now. His growth and consistency is amazing week in and week out. The only thing holding him back from throwing for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns every week is the conservative play calling. His completion percentage and quarterback rating are by far the best in college football. He could be the leader in yards per game and touchdowns per game, but the only thing holding him back is they won't allow it. Our best athletes are our receivers and tight ends, and there's no team in the country that can stop them. So while we're comfortably winning every game, thanks largely to the defense, the offense at times still plays scared. Not the players, the coaching. And I have to assume Day is in control of that. To further belabor this point, when the Buckeyes went up 31-14 in the second half, they came out and ran the ball 3 times straight and punted. And even Klatt during the game said he couldn't believe they went that conservative already in the game. That's why we win 38-14 and Oregon and Indiana score 50 plus when they are dominating opponents, because they don't get conservative. They keep throwing the ball and putting the game further out of reach. This is a game where second string could have played most, if not all, of the fourth quarter, but instead the starters were out there the entire game. So the conservative play calling at times just gets frustrating. And frankly, people say things like Ohio State doesn't play anybody. And while 38-14 is a good win, we could have won this game 55-14. It just looks better. And whether people like it or not, looks, when it comes to the quote unquote eye test for the committee and everyone else, they matter. And this conservative play calling holds the offense back. It holds Julian Sayin back from his Heisman Trophy potential. It's holding Jeremiah-Smith back as well in his Heisman potential. Now I'll go over the defense, and I don't have a lot to say, except it was clear in this game that the defense was not fired up in this game emotionally early in the game. I mean, they were playing a 4-loss Penn State team, and they knew it. And they got bullied a little bit in the first half by giving up their first touchdown in the first quarter all year, and by giving up 14 points in the first half, which was also a season high. And they were allowing less than 6 points a game. And Penn State already had more than doubled that total by halftime. And that's not anything Penn State was doing. We knew what Penn State was going to be. They were going to come out and they were going to run the ball, and they were running the ball. They were pushing the ball down the defense's throat by running in the first half, and the defense just wasn't fired up. They just weren't. Their emotions, their play was not the same that they normally are. The second half, they came out more inspired and looked like the real Ohio State defense, and they shut Penn State down and didn't allow any points, which means the 16 points they gave up to Illinois is still the season high. I also want to touch on the personal foul / targeting call on Calebdowns, where the targeting was reviewed and was taken away. I will start by saying I 100% believe that was targeting, and I thought Downs was done for the rest of the game and the first half of the Purdue game. And when the refs came back and took the targeting away, I was a little surprised, but I also felt justified, because virtually every game there are bad calls or no calls that go against Ohio State, and they have to play through this bad officiating. So to finally see a bad call end in the Buckeyes' favor was okay with me. I didn't, and I don't feel bad about it. Just think of all the pass interference calls on our receivers that don't get called every single week. I see them every week. We just have to play through them. So my stance is good. I'm happy the refs made a bad call in the Buckeyes' favor for once. Now, here are some final numbers For those that are interested, the Buckeyes had 480 total yards to Penn State's 200. Sayin passed for 316 with the well-documented fact that he only had 3 incompletions and 4 touchdown passes. He had an 87% completion rate, which is amazing, in only 23 pass attempts, which frankly is not enough. The running game, the Buckeyes spread the ball out to 4 different running backs and had 164 yards rushing to Penn State's 55, which is an amazing total when you consider that's all Penn State really can try to do is run the ball, and the Buckeyes defense held them to 55 yards. Each team had 1 turnover. Jeremiah-Smith and Tate both had over 100 yards receiving in this game. And of course, Jeremiah-Smith had that amazing touchdown catch off the deflection. And Sayin did an amazing job noticing when Smith was being covered one-on-one and getting him the ball. The Sayin for Heisman campaign should be real and should be pushed out by all of Buckeye Nation. Now, I understand it's torn between Jeremiah-Smith and Julian Sayin, but both of them should be in New York. So more on this later in the show, so stick around for my Sayin for Heisman numbers compared to the other leading candidates. On to my next game, number 9, Vanderbilt at number 20, Texas. Oh yes, and of course, I picked Ohio State to beat Penn State. As I said, I will always pick Ohio State to win this season. That is, because I do believe they are the best team in the country. This game, I picked Texas to win. If you watched this game or saw this game, or maybe were tracking the score on this game, you saw in the second half that this game wasn't even as close as the final score predicted or showed. Texas led this game 34-10 at one point, and Vanderbilt stormed back by scoring 21 points in the fourth quarter to pull within 3, but they were unable to complete the comeback at Texas and made it the final score a close game. The final stats show that it was a very close game. Vandy actually had a little more passing yards and time of possession over Texas. So it was a nice comeback effort by Vandy, but Texas walks away with the win. Now, both teams are 7-2 and still have their eyes on the playoffs. But like I said in last week's episode, I don't see either of these teams winning out. And 3 losses should be enough to not make the 12-team playoff this year. Next game, number 18, Oklahoma at number 14, Tennessee. I did pick Tennessee to win this game, but Oklahoma wins it 33-27. This game is one of those games where the team with the better offense just lost. Tennessee was moving the ball at will and doing the one thing you can't do when you're in scoring position, which is turning the ball over. If you've watched my previous episodes, you know how I feel about turnovers more than any other stat. And turnovers are what absolutely killed Tennessee and lost them the game. Tennessee had 3 turnovers and 2 turnovers on 4th down stops. Those don't technically count as turnovers, but that's turning the ball over when you're stopped on 4th down. Oklahoma had 2 turnovers, but it was the timing of the turnovers that made the difference. Tennessee had 3 turnovers in scoring position, and you just can't lose those points. And that ended up costing them the game. So statistics, Tennessee had 456 total yards to Oklahoma's 351. Tennessee passed for almost 400 yards, 393 to Oklahoma's 159. But then Tennessee only ran the ball for 63 yards, and Oklahoma had 192 yards rushing, which also gave them a small edge in time of possession, which is helpful when you play the best offense in the SEC and the second best offense in the country behind USC. So Oklahoma was able to go into Tennessee and pull out the win, which frankly, I didn't think they were going to be able to do. All right, next game is number 23, USC at Nebraska. Now, I picked USC to win this game, and they did win it 21-17. USC was losing this game, and it looked like Nebraska was the better team for a while. Then Nebraska's starting quarterback, Raiola, got hurt, and their freshman backup quarterback, Latif, had to come in and play. And, well, let's just say he was not moving the ball. Nebraska was relegated to running the ball or nothing, as Latif went 5 of 7 on his completions for 7 yards. That's right, barely over 1 yard per completion, because they were mostly wide receiver screens. USC outscored Nebraska 15-3 in the second half to win this game. Now, it was not a masterful game by the USC offense, which, as I mentioned before, was number 1 in the country going into the game. Maava was only able to muster 9 completions out of 23 attempts for 135 yards with 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. Just not a good game for Maava at all. And Raiola, who frankly I don't think is a very good quarterback personally, was 10 of 15 for 91 yards with 1 touchdown before he was injured. Now, USC outrushed Nebraska 135 yards to 98, and each team had 1 turnover. Now, I have to say, if Raiola doesn't get injured, I think Nebraska wins this game. I mean, I picked USC to win this game, but Nebraska showed me something in this game. And unfortunately for them, this loss takes them to 6-3 and takes them out of any playoff dreams they might have had. And USC goes to 6-2, and that keeps them in the playoff hunt. So my next game is Cincinnati at Utah. I picked Cincinnati, and Utah absolutely destroyed them 45-14. The one thing I said, though, was assuming this game had a normal starting time, because I didn't know the time of this game. Well, it turns out this game started at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, and Cincinnati played like they had gone to sleep. Not so bad, but they moved the ball on offense, but ultimately they had 3 very untimely turnovers in scoring position again, and this led to the disparaging final score. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I still believe Cincinnati is the better football team. This game was in Utah, super late at night. Cincinnati was not sharp when they needed to be. They moved the ball. They averaged more yards per play. They outpassed Utah slightly, but Utah outrushed and scored when they were in scoring position, and Cincinnati just had turnovers. Turnovers are killers. I cannot emphasize that enough. If I was a coach, that would be one of the things I emphasize more than anything else. So congratulations to Utah, who stays alive for their playoff dreams. But Cincinnati still only has 2 losses, and they are still in the hunt as well, albeit less likely with a loss this bad. Other games worth discussing. Georgia barely scrapes by with a win against Florida. Now, SEC fans want to act like Florida is a good football team. Florida is 3-5, with 3 of their losses coming outside of the SEC. So don't try to tell me they are as good as their head coach just got fired and Georgia can barely beat them. Like, this is not proof that the entire SEC is good, because Georgia barely beats a 3-5 football team. This is actually more proof that the SEC is not good, except maybe Texas A&M. So listen to me. Georgia is not good. If they make the playoffs, which is likely because of their cupcake schedule the rest of the way, they are pretty much a bye for anyone who has to play them outside of their stadium. Yeah, Georgia is good at home, but if Georgia plays anywhere else but their home stadium, they are done. in the playoffs. Georgia's remaining schedule is Mississippi State, then they get Texas at home, then mighty Scarlet, and then they go to Georgia Tech. Now they could lose one of these games, and they would still only be a 2-loss SEC team, which will likely put them in the playoffs. But again, I don't expect Georgia to do anything in the playoffs. Next thing I want to mention is Clemson loses again. Now, along with Penn State, they are both 3-5. They were both supposed to be national championship contenders, and still equally the two biggest collapses I've ever seen. And while Penn State and James Franklin's firing has been well documented, why is nobody talking about Dabo Swinney? Why is nobody complaining about what's happening at Clemson? Their horrible season is flying under the radar, and I just don't understand why they're getting a pass like this. To some degree, I do, right? People are going to, Dabo Swinney's won national championships and he's had great teams. Yeah, okay. He has. But right now, they're terrible. And that's not because they don't have talent. They have talent. They have NFL players on that roster, and they're 3-5. So to me, there's a lot of questions unanswered in Clemson. Maybe the biggest upset of the weekend is Georgia Tech loses to North Carolina State, and they fall from the unbeatens. And this game was an offensive shootout. Like, each team had almost 600 yards of total offense. There were over 1,100 yards of total offense in this game. The difference is that North Carolina State was able to score touchdowns while Georgia Tech had to settle for field goals. Otherwise, this game is fairly equally statistically across the board. Georgia Tech passed for more yards. North Carolina State ran for more yards. The turnovers were even, and the touchdowns versus field goals was the difference. Now, this loss still allows Georgia Tech to have everything in front of them. Their schedule is Boston College, Pitt, and Georgia, which is a non-conference game left to be played. So they could win at Boston College and Pitt, but I don't know if they'll beat Pitt, and lose to Georgia, and they would still be in the ACC championship game, since that game doesn't count for the ACC. Another game I want to talk about, Scum. For those of you who don't know who Scum is Michigan. Okay, if you haven't been paying attention, it's lower SC, capital UM, Scum. They survive against a 2-6 Purdue team at home. They lost the turnover battle. They passed for 145 yards, and they ran for 253 yards and barely beat a bad Purdue team. This just further proves, if you focus on stopping their rushing attack, they are easy to beat, just like USC did when they embarrassed them 31-13. Next game, Miami loses to SMU in overtime, with Beck getting picked off again in the overtime period. Now, Beck has 9 interceptions on the season to go with his 14 touchdown passes. Now, this doesn't seem like a quarterback worth paying millions of dollars to come to your school. Now, I have nothing against Beck, but how could anyone believe that Georgia was the problem and not him? So to put this in perspective, Duke's quarterback has 21 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions, and he came from Tulane. Now, granted, he got paid millions too, and they haven't had quite the same schedule that Miami has had, and they also have more losses. But it's not the quarterback's fault. It's the defense's fault. Finally, I have to mention, because I'm based out of Tucson, Arizona, and I live in Tucson, Arizona now in my life, the ass whooping that Arizona put on Colorado, 52-17 at Colorado. This game was over by halftime. And what happened to the Deion hype that was so in your face last year. You know, Colorado was fighting for a playoff spot last year, and this year they're now 3-6 and fighting to become bowl eligible. So is Deion the real deal as a coach, or is he a one-hit wonder? That remains to be seen. What isn't in doubt is, as a player, Deion was one of the best defensive backs in football history, and he was an amazing overall athlete. Punt returner, baseball player. He was an excellent athlete, but that doesn't always translate to coaching. So we will find out if Deion is able to turn this Colorado team around. Also noting, Auburn lost 10-3 to Kentucky, and it should be no surprise that Hugh Freeze has been fired today, as this is recorded on Sunday mornings. So I won't be able to discuss the committee's rankings that comes out on Tuesday. And that makes Auburn another school looking for a head coach in an unprecedented number of openings with major college programs. There just aren't enough good head coaching candidates available to do what these programs are looking for. And some of these teams are going to be in this position for some time by hiring, being disappointed, firing, and starting over again. That's the reality of this situation. All these teams are not going to go out there and find a coach that is going to be the next Ryan Day or Nick Saban or Urban Meyer or whatever it is they're looking for. A couple of them will hit. Most of them will miss because they expect these coaches to come in and win all these games against ranked opponents. And it's just not likely. Those coaches just aren't out there right now. So we'll see who they hire and how that plays out. Now let's take a look at the current Big Ten standings. As you can see, Indiana and Ohio State are still on pace to meet in the Big Ten championship game, with Iowa, Oregon, USC, and at this point, technically Scum still eyeing playoff spots. But Scum will be eliminated on November 29th. So I really don't see them getting in. So really, we're just talking about Iowa, Oregon, USC still fighting to get in the playoffs. The problem is they will be playing each other and potentially eliminating each other. For example, if Oregon beats Iowa this weekend, Iowa will be out because that'll be their third loss. However, if Iowa were to beat Oregon, that's still only Oregon's second loss. And Oregon and USC still have to play each other. Potentially, the winner of that knocks the other one out of the playoff race. So some big games yet to come in the Big Ten to decide rankings and playoff spots. Let's go look at the SEC standings. Texas and Alabama are still in the lead for the SEC championship game. Ole Miss and Georgia still in the mix. And Bama would have to lose twice for Georgia to make it in because of the head-to-head loss. And Ole Miss lost to Georgia, but they didn't play Alabama head-to-head, so I'm not sure how that works if Bama were to lose and have one loss and Ole Miss were to just have one loss and say A&M was undefeated. I'm not sure who would be in the conference championship game based off that, but multiple teams are still eyeing a playoff spot as well. So you have Texas, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt also all looking to make the playoffs. But some of them still have to play each other, and they will knock each other out of contention. To me, no 3-loss team deserves to be in the playoffs unless they are a 2-loss team that makes it to the conference championship and loses in the conference championship game. Then maybe they should be considered. But even then, that's questionable. Current ACC standings, Virginia is in control of their destiny right now, with 5 other teams in contention to make the ACC title game. I would say there are 4 teams in contention for a playoff spot because I don't see Miami getting in at this point. Most likely they will lose to Pitt the last game of the season, but even if they don't, 2-loss team that didn't make their conference title game in a weak conference. It doesn't look good for Miami, but we'll see what the committee thinks and we'll see how things play out. All right, now we're going to check out the AP top 25 this week, and let's just discuss who's missing. Now, in my opinion, who's missing are Iowa and Pitt. They're both 2-loss teams. Both of them 2-loss teams, not in the top 25, and they're in the Big Ten. Why aren't they in there? Why aren't they there? You have Tennessee at 23, which is a 3-loss team. And that's frankly just how far we've reached in the SEC bias, where 3-loss SEC teams are still in the top 25, while 2-loss teams from other conferences, especially the Big Ten, are being left out. The narrative rolls on. Georgia, way too high at number 5. They're not a good team. I don't care that they're 7-1. If you use the eye test and then barely squeaking out of these games that they frankly could have lost to Auburn and Tennessee and Florida, and yet they barely squeak by and win, how does that make them the number 5 team in the country? I don't get it. They don't belong there. Same for Notre Dame. I'm not saying Notre Dame doesn't belong in the top 25. They absolutely do. They don't belong as the number 10 team in the country. We're not at the point yet where a 2-loss team deserves to be in the top 10. We're not there yet. At some point, maybe, but not yet. Texas, way too high at number 13. Way too high. And that'll all play itself out when Texas loses another game, and they will lose another game. And finally, Miami. Why is Miami number 18? They've lost 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row. They don't deserve to be above Washington or even scum for that matter. They don't deserve to be above USC. If they even belong in the top 25, which is debatable to me because 2 recent losses shows your trajectory. Like I said, Iowa and Pitt should be in there, and frankly, that should knock out Tennessee. It should knock out Miami, and the AP is terrible. It's just terrible. So let's talk about my top 10. Now, this isn't easy to do. I have to consider everything I just discussed. What's your overall record, which matters a lot to me. Yes, the conference you're in matters, of course, but if undefeated is still undefeated, and 1 loss is still 1 loss. And you can cry and complain about the fact that these teams don't play, mighty Florida, who's 3-5, and all that narrative that the SEC tries to give. But this is who I have in my top 10. So, of course, number 1, Ohio State, followed by number 2, Indiana. They just look like the 2 best teams in the country, period, because of both sides of the ball. They both have great offenses, and they both have very strong defenses. And that's why Texas A&M is number 3, because Texas A&M has an elite offense. Texas A&M can score points, but also you can score points on Texas A&M. So Texas A&M is vulnerable to being outscored by some team, and they don't have a great defense. So while they're undefeated in the SEC, I give them that respect at number 3, but they are definitely vulnerable to being outscored. Number 4, I have Oregon this week because they're still a 1-loss team in the best conference in the country, that being the Big Ten, of course. Number 5, I have Ole Miss. They leapfrog Alabama to me, and you might ask why. And while I typically don't agree with measuring teams based off of the same team they play, I do agree with looking at a performance. And I just felt like the way Ole Miss played yesterday against South Carolina versus the way Alabama played against South Carolina, Ole Miss just looked like the better football team. And that's really why I put Ole Miss at 5, and then I move Alabama to 6. I just like the the way they play better. That doesn't mean they'll stay there, but that's where I have them right now. Again, this is week to week. This is subject to change based off a team's performance every week. Number 7, I have to put BYU. They're undefeated in the Big 12. They're currently in first place. And at number 8, Texas Tech. They have one loss in the Big 12. They're a one-loss team. And then number 9, Virginia, for the very same reason. They're a one-loss football team, and they deserve this right now until proven otherwise. And then finally, number 10, as much as it pains me to do it, I put Georgia. They're a one-loss football team, but they're a fraud. They should have lost to Tennessee. They should have lost to Auburn. I'm not saying they should have lost to Florida, but again, just barely beating Florida, that's not respectable to me. You're supposed to be one of the best teams in the country. Based off the fact that they're one loss and in the SEC and hanging on by the skin of their teeth, Georgia comes in at number 10. So you can compare my top 10 to the AP's top 10 and tell me what you think. I know SEC fans are going to be haters. You're going to, you're crapping on the SEC. Yeah, and maybe I'm doing it a little strongly because they get so much love from the narrative. And so I need to do what I need to do to reverse that trend. I also just believe the SEC is not that good. That's what I believe.
Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all 3 of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience. I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks.
Now it's time for Legends in Scarlet and Gray. It was time for defense this week, and I had a player come to mind when I was trying to think of who I wanted to highlight this week. Someone came to mind on defense that maybe statistically dominate numbers wise, but when he played and he was on the field, he was an intimidating, massive man. And most of you are probably too young to remember or know him, but I'm talking about Alonzo Spellman. Now, if you don't know Alonzo Spellman, he was a defensive end for Ohio State from 1989 to 1991. He started 26 total games. He played in 34. He had 145 tackles, 25 and a half tackles, and 9 sacks. Now, those aren't necessarily phenomenal numbers, but physically, he was just an imposing beast. He tied the team for the lead in tackles for loss with 10 in 1989 when he was a freshman. He started as an outside linebacker, but then he moved to defensive end because he was just gigantic. He was big and physically opposing. Now, his junior year, 1991, he was named to first team All Big Ten, and his freshman and sophomore years, he was second team All Big Ten. He received the Sam B. Nicola Award in 1988 as a high school player, obviously prior to Ohio State, and he was just a beast. Now, he came out of Ohio State in 91 as a junior. In my opinion, maybe a mistake. I felt like he should have played another year back in that time, but he was first team All Big Ten. You got to do what you got to do, and he felt like he was ready for the NFL, and he did not play great in the NFL. He was not a great NFL player, but while he was at Ohio State, he was a big, physical, imposing, scary player. And like I always say, if you don't know about him, look him up, learn about him. Alonzo Spellman, this week's legend in Scarlet and Gray. Now it's time for my predictions of week 11. Typically my top 5 weekly games, but I went with 6 games this week coming up. Last week I didn't have a great week, so I went 3-2. And I was 35-16 going into that week. And after that, I'm now 38-18 overall in my picks, which is still plus 20. So I ain't mad at it. Do I get a little disappointed that some of these teams, i.e. Tennessee this last weekend over Oklahoma, let me down in my picks? Yeah. But at the end of the day, do I care if Tennessee beats Oklahoma? No. I don't care who wins that game. It's just who I thought would win that game based off of what they're capable of doing. So plus 20, I'll take it. Let's see if we can make it better by the end of this season. And by the end of the playoffs, I'm going to be making predictions all the way through to the national championship. All right, let's start with, of course, Ohio State 8-0, undefeated, #1 team in the country at Purdue. Obviously, a no-brainer pick of a game. Ohio State averages 36 points per game to Purdue's 22 points per game. Defensively, Ohio State gives up now almost 7 points per game to Purdue's 27 points per game. And the line, which I don't bet on, I'm not making picks on the line, but I will say this. In this case, Ohio State is plus 28.5, which means they have to beat Purdue by at least 29, and I really believe they will beat them worse than that. So I don't think 29 is a high enough point differential in this game, but it's at Purdue, so maybe Purdue steps up and plays a little better, but for Ohio State, it's not really about what Purdue does. It's about what Ohio State does. It's about the coach's play calling, which, as you know, gets conservative, especially when we had the lead. Julian Sayin could easily pass for 500 yards in this game if they wanted to let him do it. Let's just see what happens. But I like Ohio State even to cover the 28.5. The next game is #6 Oregon at unranked, sadly, Iowa. And Oregon is a 6.5 point favorite in this game. Now, Oregon averages 41 points per game to Iowa's 31 points per game. Both of them defensively average, giving up 13 points per game. I feel like both of these teams are on to different projections. To me, Oregon is a little lost, a little confused right now. They don't feel like the typical Oregon, whereas Iowa is playing the best football they've played all season. And it is incredibly hard to go into Ames and beat Iowa when they're fired up for a game. Indiana barely did it, and I genuinely believe Indiana is the second best team in the country. And therefore, I don't think Oregon is going to do it. I think Iowa will beat Oregon. Justifiably, they should be in the top 15, at least by committee ranking, if not higher, by the end of this game. So Iowa to beat Oregon. So take Iowa and the plus 6.5 if you're a betting person. I am not. The next game I picked was #3 Texas A&M at #19 Missouri. Texas A&M a 6.5 point favorite. Offensively, A&M averages 37 points per game to Missouri's 35 points per game. Defensively, A&M gives up 24 points per game, and Missouri only gives up 17 points per game. Now, Missouri has a very good defense. They held Vanderbilt to 17 points. They held Alabama into the low 20s. I can't remember. I think it was maybe 24 points or something like that. And they are at home, so they do have a very good defense. But they are also very one-dimensional, and they lost their starting quarterback last game. And I don't think a 6.5 point spread is a big enough point spread for Missouri. And I like A&M to win this by more than 6.5, because if you focus on Missouri's running game and shut down their running game, they have nothing to offer. Really. I'm not saying they won't get any passing yards, but it's not what they do. And if they had to focus on passing the ball, they would not be successful. So I like A&M to win this pretty easily, well over the 6.5 points given in this game. So my next game is BYU at Texas Tech. This is a big game. This is essentially for first place in the Big 12. BYU, number 8, undefeated. Texas Tech, number 9, 8-1 with that one loss to ASU. And Texas Tech is a 9.5-point favorite. So BYU averages 36 points per game. Texas Tech averages 43 points per game. BYU gives up 17 points per game, and Texas Tech averages 13 points per game. Everything about this game screams Texas Tech. It's at home. They have a great defensive line, which I spoke about before. They have maybe the best defensive lineman in the country. If you go by NCAA college football EA's ratings, he's the highest rated defensive lineman in the country, I believe, if I remember correctly. That's neither here nor there. I like Texas Tech to win this football game. Again, I don't exactly know who BYU is. They did beat Utah, right? That's a huge win. Utah is a very good team. Texas Tech won, but at home, BYU, big game. Give me Texas Tech. I don't know about the minus 9.5 point spread. To me, this game's either going to be close or Texas Tech is going to win handily. I don't really see this going any other way than that, but I'm not always right, as we can see by my 38-18 record. I am wrong sometimes. All right, another big game is Navy at Notre Dame. I picked this game because it's a rivalry game. Navy 7-1. Notre Dame 6-2. Navy averages 35 points per game to Notre Dame's 37 points per game. Defensively, Navy gives up 24 points per game, and Notre Dame gives up 20 points per game. Notre Dame is favored by 24.5 points. I don't know enough about Navy to know if that's too high of a spread or not. I don't know how good their run defense is. They do give up 24 points per game, but I don't know if that's typically by air, by passing attack, or if they just have a bad defense in general, because that's a lot of points. But obviously, I'm picking Notre Dame to win this game. But whether Notre Dame can beat them by 24.5 or more or not will remain to be seen in my eyes, because Notre Dame is not a passing team. And if Navy can stifle their running game even a little bit, they can keep this a closer game than the line says. But take Notre Dame to win the game. And then finally, this is a throw-in. This isn't a top 5 game of the week. It's worth noting and keeping an eye on. And this is Alabama against LSU. It's Alabama at home, who's 7-1, 11.5 point favorites, and LSU, well documented, 5-3 with Brian Kelly getting fired. LSU offense has been awful. They also fired their offensive coordinator, so they'll have a new offensive coordinator at 25 points per game. Alabama scores 34 points per game. Defensively, LSU gives up 19 points per game to Alabama's 18 points per game. And I'm picking Alabama to win this game, I think fairly obviously. But the question mark to me is, what LSU team are we going to see? They have a new offensive coordinator. Their offensive line is not very good, or at least hasn't been thus far. I think they could show up and give Alabama a game. They could be highly motivated. I really think there is a sense of relief at LSU that Brian Kelly is gone. There's been a lot of talk about how he was poison for the culture, and that can be reinvigorating. It can take this pressure off your shoulders, and you can just play more carefree as a football team. And, I really like LSU to give Alabama a good game, even in Tuscaloosa. So I'm taking Alabama to win. I don't know if they can cover the 11.5 points. I just don't. So you can decide that for yourself. So I have Ohio State over Purdue, Iowa over Oregon as my upset of the week, Texas A&M over Missouri, Alabama over LSU, Texas Tech over BYU, and then Notre Dame over Navy. All right, now it's time for Instagram topics of the week. Here you have this graphic 11 Warriors put up on Julian Sayin's last 5 games. Check this out. In the last 5 games, he has an 82 completion percentage rate, throwing for 1,409 yards with 15 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So honestly, he's the best quarterback in the country, leading the best team in the country. And the only thing holding him back, for those who don't actually watch the games and just look at statistics, is the play calling. They don't actually see what a surgeon he is on the field, carving out defenses with his decision making and incredible accurate throws. Incredible. His accuracy is unmatched. You see things like Mendoza's stats, and he has more passing TDs, and that's the play calling. Sayin is 176 of 218 attempts for an incredible 80.7% on this season completion rate, with 2,188 passing yards and 23 touchdowns. Now, who do they have him behind right now? They have him behind, at number 1, they have Mendoza, who's 162 of 224 attempts with 72.3% completion rate, not even close to 80.7, and 2,124 yards, which is below Sayin's yards, and 25 touchdowns. So he has 2 more touchdown passes than Sayin. And let's throw the number 2 guy, the other leading candidate, for whatever reason, Ty Simpson, in the mix. I guess it's because he's on Bama, he plays in the SEC, but he is 177 for 261, almost 50 more attempts than Sayin. He has the 67.8% completion rate, which is clearly not close to Sayin's over 80%. And he has 2,184 yards, which is less than Sayin's with many more attempts. He also only has 21 touchdown passes, which is 2 behind Sayin. Sayin leads all 3 of them with 10 yards per completion average. So someone please tell me why he is considered to be in 3rd place in this race. He's clearly the best quarterback in the country. I'll even give you an argument for its nose to nose with Mendoza right now, because he's on an undefeated number 2 Indiana team, and let them play it out in the Big Ten championship, and may the best man win. But for my money, Sayin is the best quarterback in the country, and I've watched them all play full games, multiple games, and I would take Sayin over anyone that I've seen so far this season. All right, that will do it for this week's show. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I am open to conversations, whether they be agreements or debates. I'm here for it. Thanks for listening to the Buckeye Battlecry show. Please make sure you follow me here on YouTube. Please, if you watch the show, just give me a follow, give me a like. It doesn't cost you anything. It really helps me in promoting the show and getting the show out there. And even more than that, comments. Comments really help the algorithm of the show and get the show out there. I know that I'm going to be limited to mostly Buckeye fans watching my show. I get it. Most people that aren't Ohio State fans are Ohio State haters, and they're not going to like me or this show just because I'm clearly biased in my love for Ohio State, although I'm not biased in my analysis for Ohio State, because I'm just as hard on them as anyone else would be in the country. I think harder. When I listen to other commenters and broadcasters talk about the Buckeyes, they are aglow about who the Buckeyes are and what they're doing. And I'm not saying they're not doing well, because they are, but they definitely have room for improvement still. And I'm here to talk about it. So please listen to me anywhere you also find podcasts. If you don't have time to watch it on YouTube, you can find me on any podcast. And until then, bleed scarlet and gray. Go Bucks.